All right, Krishna, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm taking a question from one of my viewers. So the question goes like this: Can you tell by looking at the natal chart what God expects from you? I've heard that striving to please God is missing the point. I can't understand this. There must be a way to be right with God. So great question, and of course my response comes from the Bhakti tradition. Other traditions may have different answers to this question, and my response also comes from my best understanding of what my guru and my other teachers have taught me, as well as the Bhakti philosophy itself. So um, can you tell by looking at the natal chart what God expects from you? Well, the simple answer to that is first and foremost that there's nothing that God expects from us. And this, of course, gets right into the second point that my viewer made, which is that I've heard that striving to please God is missing the point. I can't understand this. There must be a way to be right with God. So in the Bhakti tradition, we start off with this idea that we're endowed with free will. And so we can choose to experience ourselves as eternal beings that are a part of God, that are a part of the divine whole. Or we can use our free will and experience ourselves as apart, cut off, and seemingly alone, even though it's impossible for us to actually be alone because we are all by nature a part of God, eternal. This entire world is facilitated and created by God in the Bhakti tradition in order for the soul to be able to choose lifetimes of experiencing what it's like to be apart from God. And that's why this world is said to be an illusion. It's a real illusion in the sense that a dream is a real illusion. It's a part of God's divine Leela, God's divine play, God's divine nature, that God creates a realm for uh, divine beings to experience themselves as apart and cut off in some ways. But of course, within this realm is always built in the opportunity and um, the invitation to bring our hearts and souls back to God. But God isn't sitting from anywhere saying, uh, well, I expect that you do it. I expect that you get with the program here, you idiots. It's not like that. So in Bhakti we say, no, that this world is created because God is so infinitely loving that God creates an entire world for beings to choose something other than God. So that's why we call this a kind of shadow world, a world that is a reflection of God, but kind of a dimly lit shadow world reflection of God, in which everything that we experience is ultimately divine. It's ultimately God's energy. But because we're experiencing it from the standpoint of the illusion of being apart or separate, it also lacks substance. It's not really satisfying for the soul, and it's not entirely real. So it's sort of like a dream world. So God creates that for us because God doesn't expect us to do anything. Now, that might seem like God doesn't care about us, but that's not it at all. Uh, in the scope of eternity, if you want to think about God like a parent, it's like, well, we let our children do things because we love them that may be contrary to, their best interests sometimes. Like, you let my daughter. I wish sometimes that my daughter would choose to do something like this or like that I think would be healthy. But I also recognize that I love her enough to let her have her own free will and make her own mistakes and have her own adventures and exploration of who she is. In the scope of eternity, God cares about us enough to give us that freedom because there's nothing at stake. So why not give beings their freedom to do something like that? And this is what's meant by God doesn't expect anything from us. It's not that God doesn't love us or care about us or that God is indifferent. It's that God loves us so much and knows that nothing can actually harm us, nothing can actually hurt us, nothing can actually take us away from being a part of God. And so we're also given the facility to use our free will to experience being apart from God. In that sense, God doesn't expect anything from us. Now, it's a bit of a paradox because at the same time, there is a lot of benefit in striving to please God in bhakti yoga. Striving to please God as though God is displeased or expecting us to please God is missing the point. Um, because you also have to imagine in Bhakti Yoga, we say God is completely pleased. Like, imagine God as a being, let's just say you're in like a beautiful sanctuary. In the innermost sanctum of that sanctuary, just imagine that God is like floating in the lotus position in midair, with like mudras and surrounded by, golden light and the most beautiful sounds, music, and sights that you've ever seen. God is completely satisfied in this picture, right? God is totally can't get more happy. That can't get more blissed out. Can't be pleased more than God is already pleased, because God is self-sufficient. God is God has all qualities, all energies, all perfections, and so because God is complete, uh, there's nothing lacking. And when there's nothing lacking, there's no expectation of anyone or anything else. And in fact, what we're invited to do is to participate in that very state of being with God through relationship to our source. We each have the same potential for complete bliss within us. And so in bhakti, the goal of striving to please God is not done because God is sitting there, with a ruler or a measuring stick or a grade book somewhere saying, well, they better measure up or I won't be pleased or I won't be satisfied. But ironically, when we want to become like God, it's also very, very pleasing to God, because then God gets to join with us in relationship. We enter into that kind of meditative space with God. We each take our seat in that same room, enjoying the exact same uh, perfections. And when we do that, of course, we're coming into yoga, into union with God. And so ironically, that's very, very pleasing to God. But it's not that by not doing it, we're displeasing God either. So it's sort of like, yeah, it's sort of, again, like you think of the parent, and you think of the parent as like, if my daughter wants to go do something on her own, like, I'm not displeased, right? Like, I respect that. But if she chooses with her own free will to come and hang out with me, I'm super pleased. You know what I mean? But it's not that I'm lacking any, like, let's just say I'm reading a book, and I'm on the couch. I'm really pleased with reading my book. And if she wants to go do something in the other room, like watch TV, and I think, like, I wouldn't want her to watch TV or whatever, but I'm just like, well, I love her. Just let her have her free will. She can do what she wants, and I don't condemn her. I love her. And then of her own free will, she decides to come and sit down on the couch next to me and read a book. You know, my pleasure is enhanced by her presence. Do you know what I mean? So similarly, God's all that God is made infinitely more glad when God's creations join with God in God's bliss, happiness, and love. So that's the paradigm. It's not about getting right with God or striving to please God because we're missing the mark, or because God expects something of us, but rather because it's an open invitation into an open sanctuary of unending love. And when more beings step into that room and join in that community worship and meditation, the happiness increases. In the Bhagavad Gita, this is actually explained in a few places. Um, you know, Krishna says at one point, like, basically, like, people can do all of these different things, but the one that pleases me more than anything is, and the one that I actually submit myself to and come under the control of, are the ones who, looking at all of the options and choices and whatever, they go, oh, there's nothing I want to do more than be with God. To that person, I am very dear to them, and they are very dear to me. So uh, we can become closer and closer with God and make God's heart happier and happier But absolutely not expected, and absolutely God's love for us does not, uh, diminish at all ever. It can only be enhanced. It can only be made greater. But by virtue, and that's like just the nature of relationships, right? It's like, yeah, you can always make, and in bhakti we say, that the relationship between the lover and the beloved is one of a kind of friendly competition of trying to make the other person happier. No, 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 let me make you happier. No, 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 let me make you happier. And so when a person decides, a soul decides to freely enter into that kind of relationship with God, um, it's true that the intimacy is of a totally different variety than what we're experiencing when we're in the material world turning our back to God. But as we turn our back to God, God isn't sitting there with a clock, like tapping his hand on the clock, being like, "You really messed up, and you better get back here, and I expect so much from you." You see what I mean? So this world is again an extension of God's total blessing and allowance of our explorations. And so it hopefully that helps. I hope that this response helps. Um, so when you say there must be a way to be right with God, it's not about rightness in bhakti as much as it is about love. There must be so reframe it. I've heard that striving to love God, please God, is missing the point. Yes, striving to love God is the point. There must be a way to be right with God. Change that into there must be a way to be in love with God. And once we start thinking like that, then we start to let go of the voices that are telling us, look, you got to get right with God. You got to be pleasing God. You got to be getting it right. You got to be correcting things. You got to be progressing. You got to be mastering things. You have to be using your ambition to somehow strive to make God happy, right? As if God is not happy. So, yeah, just imagine an infinitely happy God that just gets happier if you decide to join in that happiness with God. And otherwise, if you don't, God loves you the same anyway. So, yeah, that's it's a bit of a paradox, but that's how we think about it in bhakti. So hopefully that's helpful, and I um, I hope that other people may have enjoyed this video and gotten something good from it as well. If you have questions at all ever, info@nightlightastrology.com is the email address. And yeah, I hope to hear from you soon. All right. Hare Krishna, everyone.